Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz, and today's presentation is going to be introducing Prophet Muhammad on peace and blessings. And I'm looking at this from the lens of accountability coupled with mercy. So the theme for this month, actually, usually the month that we review the teachings of Prophet Muhammad and his character, is titled Welcoming Mercy. So given that sometimes the subtitles to the presentation I do is not as accurate as I would like it to be, I wrote out what I am going to say so people who need the writing can be able to see it as I am discussing it. So I am going to share that with you to help you follow along. Okay. So the presentation for today is going to be titled The Highest Standard in the Land. Again, the theme for the month, and I explore different aspects of this understanding, but for today's presentation, it's the highest standard in the land. So a standard so high that only a true messenger of God could bear it. God didn't merely choose the Prophet Muhammad upon him peace and blessings. He entrusted him with the highest moral and spiritual standard ever placed upon a human being. This is something that we have to kind of understand and reflect upon. The Quran makes this very clear. If he had falsely attributed something to us, referring to Prophet Muhammad upon him peace and blessings, we would surely have seized him by the right hand, then we would surely have severed his aura, like cut off the major blood vessel from his hand. I mean, he could not forge something and say this is in God's name. And there's another aspect to this in the duḥāqq that I will mention in future presentations to show evidence of that. Is what I'd like to point out, that he does not speak out of desire. But here I'm speaking about mercy with accountability. So I looked at it from the angle of God saying that this is the standard that I hold, the leader of the messengers, the leader of the prophets. This is the standard. So the closer you are to God, the higher and higher and higher the standard you are held to. It's the highest standard in the land. The highest standard since the beginning of human creation till now. Prophet Muhammad was held to that very, very high standard. This is not a threat, again, it's a declaration of the divine standard. But this is a messenger of God. Because he's a messenger of God and the type of station and leadership that he will be entrusted with, this is the standard that I am holding him to. There is no impunity. This is the standard that he will be held to. Prophet upon him, peace and blessings, was not above scrutiny. He was held to a standard so elevated, so uncompromising, the slightest deviation would have warranted immediate divine correction. And yet he accepted it. So I mentioned this from the angle of God communicating to us through revelation that he was held to such a high standard. Now, how did the prophet respond to this? Sometimes, like, somebody can hold you to a high standard, but you don't really model that you're held to a high standard, So how did the prophet respond to being held to such a high standard? So we'll continue with this presentation from that angle, how the prophet received being held to such a high standard. He didn't flinch, he didn't negotiate, kind of, like how Satan was bothered that he was called to account. He didn't ask for leniency. He embraced the weight of divine trust with humility, courage, unwavering fidelity. Satan was in the company of the angels. It's not that I'm trying to compare the prophet with Satan, but it helps to show again about the rejection of standards versus the acceptance of standards. He was asked to be held to the standards of the angels, Satan, because he was in the company of the angels. The angels accepted that standard. Satan rejected. When God commanded Satan and the angels to bow down to Adam upon him peace, Satan refused. The angels accepted. Not because he misunderstood, but because he rejected the very idea of being held to a standard beyond his pride. Deflected, justified, and ultimately rebelled. He wanted status without surrender, influence without accountability. The prophet, upon him peace and blessings, on the other hand, wanted nothing above the pleasure of God. Okay, so his total focus, if you study his life, was always about, first and foremost, the pleasure of God. Nothing was going to override the pleasure of God. If it meant being corrected, if it meant being publicly reprimanded, if it meant enduring the trial of Ṭāʻif, where he was hit from all directions and left face to face only with the directionless. He could only go and plead his case to God. He didn't ask for revenge. So I know a lot of people will pretend to have that nature. I'll speak for myself. I want to smack the person, But to appreciate his response, you have to be honest with yourself. If you're in that person's shoes, you would not respond that way. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to appreciate his response and recognize that nobility of a response that he demonstrated and he manifested. He asked for guidance for them. He didn't seek comfort. He sought divine pleasure. He didn't resist accountability. He welcomed it. If you are not angry with me, and this is an important part of the presentation, I do not care. So again, it's that being held to a standard. He didn't say, you did this to God, but for you the right to reprimand until you are pleased. So he never sought anything above the pleasure of God. So he read the situation. Maybe God is angry with me, and this is why this happened. And for you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. So he opened that possibility, opened that door while he's pleading with God. He was opening the possibility, maybe God is angry with me. For you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. So he was open to accountability, is the point I'm trying to get across. This is the difference between a soul that surrenders to God and a soul that rebels, between a leader who transforms and a leader who corrupts. What this teaches us as Muslims, true greatness is not being above the law, but in submitting to it. If he's going to call people to submit to the law, he has to be himself, be open to submit to the law. If he's going to tell people to turn to God, maybe God is displeased with you. He has to demonstrate to people that he turns to God and says, if you're not angry, I do not care. For you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. He has to demonstrate, he has to manifest that as a leader. Mercy without accountability is manipulation or hypocrisy. Sometimes people can be merciful, but they're not accountable. So they use mercy to manipulate you, or as, hypocrisy, as they say. What is that book by Dale Carnegie? How to Influence and Win People, or something like that. Like, you could kind of manipulate people to get what you want. And people, they say you can get people with honey more than you can with vinegar. So he can catch, you could perform mercy with this whole aim of getting influence. It's a science, there's a way for you to do that and gain influence. So he could have done it. He already had that type of influence. So he could have learned the art of manipulating and performing mercy for the sake of building influence and winning friends. Something to note about that. There was no manipulation in this interaction with God and interaction with people. Accountability without mercy is tyranny. If you have no mercy and you want to call people to account, you're not even going to be going eye for an eye. Not that the prophet responded that way, but that's allowed if you're, because God doesn't rob people from their rights. But you can't go beyond an eye for an eye and say, well, I want to take out the whole village and the next village and the next village and the next village. You're not allowed to do that. That's tyranny. The prophet, upon him peace and blessings, embodied both perfectly. Again, Satan rejected standards. Even though he was in the company of the angels, he rejected standards. The Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, embodied them. That's why one was cast out and the other was raised to the heavens, upon him peace and blessings. When a leader or a teacher demands excellence from others but exempts themselves from the same scrutiny, remember saying he wanted a particular excellence from Adam, sitting here obsessed with Adam's faults and Adam's shortcomings, but he exempted himself from any scrutiny, not from Adam, but from God himself. They erode the very foundation of trust and integrity. It's a reversal of, again, the prophetic model. The Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, was held to the highest standard and he accepted it fully. He didn't ask for privilege, he embraced responsibility and accountability. That's why his mercy had weight and his leadership had credibility. Contrast this with leaders who want the perks of authority, the privileges of authority, without the burden of accountability. They preach discipline but seek revenge. They demand transparency but operate in secrecy. They preach faith, then throw shade. This is entitlement, it's not leadership. Again, you're treating the position as kind of like divine authority without any accountability. And God held the prophets and the messengers, and the leader of the messengers was held to the highest standard any human being was held to. When a teacher or leader lowers the bar for themselves, they're not just failing personally, they're corrupting the moral ecosystem around them. It sends a message: standards are for the commoners, powers for the exempt. And that breeds cynicism, not growth. If a leader wants to be followed, they must first be willing to be held accountable. Otherwise, they're not leading, they're performing. Can mercy exist without accountability? And that's a question I like to put out there. In a world that often confuses impunity with divine authority or divine favor or divine entitlement, the life of Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, offer a radical redefinition of mercy, one that is inseparable from accountability. His mission was not only to deliver revelation, but to embody it, even under the most painful circumstances. Nowhere is this more evident than in his du'a at Ṭāʻif, that moment again of rejection, mockery by fools, and divine intimacy. The trial of Ṭāʻif, mercy in the shadow of stones, he was hit from all directions. First, he lost, his uncle, he lost his wife, 10 years of torture in Mecca. So he went to Ṭāʻif hoping to have success getting the message to be accepted there, like people's hearts might open to listening to him. His support was gone. Remember, this is somebody he held leadership. He held a high level of respect and trustworthiness in the eyes of people. And to lose all of that, to come all the way down to ground zero. So like I mentioned before, it's not a rags to riches story with Prophet Muhammad. He wasn't like bottom and then he went to the top. He was at the top. And then he was brought all the way, losing everything, sacrificing everything. It was a story of sacrifice. His mission seemingly stalled. Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, walked into life with hope and left with wounds. Feet were bleeding, blistered. Nobody accepted, not only did not accept, but they sent fools to chase him and insult him and jeer him and to throw stones at him. So again, the station that he held and the sacrifices that he made. As I mentioned before with Rumi, that when God wants to give you, he pushes you in a position of humility. Not that the Prophet was proud, but the Prophet was open to receive, to show you that the level of humility that he had. So this point, some people refer to it as humiliation. I disagree. It's to show you the depth and the manifestation of his humility. And I'll explain that a little more in detail. Like Rumi said, that mercy, the gift from God comes to, the waters fall at the lowest place, in the land. Like, the I can't recall it. I'll have to put it in the video description, but I shared it before, that the water descends, you're going through, like, and you're watching a waterfall, it descends to the lowest point of the land. So God is just bringing him to this station to elevate him to the highest place in the heavens. So he was willing to receive it. This is a position, not of humiliation. A lot of people read it as humiliation. This is a position of the depth of his humility, not humiliation, but humility before God. Because when God wants to give you, he pushes you, and it's right there in the Quran. I'll have to share that with you in the description. But he'll put you into the position of humility. If you surrender, if you accept that position of humility, then he pours on you his mercy. So this was a position of humility. He put him into the very, very humble state. And the Prophet, because he was humble, he accepted that position of humility. Mercy in the shadow of stones. He was hit again from all directions to bring him face to face with the directionless. His support gone, his people again unreceptive, and his mission seemingly stalled. He didn't, even though he went into Ṭāʿif with a lot of hope, he didn't obligate God to his hopes. Sometimes you have a lot of hope, you plan, you do the best effort, and then here he is, he comes out of that with wounds. So he didn't obligate God to his hope. He trusted, and this is where the trust, the manifestation of humility, the manifestation of surrender, the manifestation of faith, the manifestation of trust. God responded not with legions or a large crowd, but with one kind. So I'd like to kind of focus on that here, particularly with respect to the situation in Palestine. If you recall, when the genocide began, soldiers would go to women's, rooms or drawers, and they take out their intimate clothes and they put them on. Like they take out their bras and they put them on, or they take out their underwear and they'd wear them. And it was like they're humiliating the woman. And people kept repeating, they're humiliating the woman, they're humiliating. I'm like, no, they're humiliating themselves. They're humiliating themselves because people interpret things based on the light that dominates their heart. Likewise, in this situation, here's these foolish people mocking and ridiculing the Prophet, throwing stones, insulting him, thinking they humiliated the Prophet. They humiliated themselves. Because the person who's wise is watching this, and they're not thinking, poor Prophet, he's humiliated. They're thinking these people are spiritually poor, and they're humiliating themselves. And look at this noble character standing in face of these morally bankrupt individuals who are throwing and jeering and attacking him, and he's responding with, again, faith. This is who interpreted it? Addas. So Addas was a wise Christian servant, and he was watching this whole situation. He saw the Prophet bleeding upon him, peace and blessings, resting in the garden, and he came and offered him grapes. Now I'll give more in future presentations on this, but he was looking at it in a different set of lens. He wasn't thinking, oh, poor Prophet, he's being humiliated. He saw nobility. And how do we know he saw nobility? Because after the Prophet spoke gently to him and shared the message of monotheism and who he was, Addas, having witnessed all of this, kissed the head of the Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, and embraced Islam. So people interpret things based on the light that dominates their heart. He's saying, look at these fools attacking this noble person. And look at this person responding with such nobility. And that's how he came approaching the Prophet. offering him grapes and wanting to get to know him. Likewise, when we see people attacking, for example, Palestine, and they're thinking like, we're humiliating you. We shouldn't accept their framing of the situation. We should push back and say, you humiliated yourself. You manifested your spiritual poverty, your moral bankruptcy. Why would you be running around dressed like that? You're supposed to be acting like a soldier. What are you doing checking women's drawers and putting on their lingerie for? Again, he saw a man bloodied, rejected, alone, yet he didn't interpret this as divine humiliation. Why? Because again, people perceive reality through the light that governs their hearts. This is Imam Ghazali, by the way. Addas saw dignity, nobility where others may have seen disgrace. So they saw their own reality. He saw truth standing firm in the face of cruelty. He saw a messenger who had done nothing wrong. Why should he be feeling humiliated when he did nothing wrong? He was surrounded by people who were doing everything wrong. The stones they threw revealed their own spiritual poverty. The mercy he showed revealed his divine strength. Addas responded not to the noise of the foolish crowd, but to the clarity of character. And that's the lesson. Never internalize, the shame of those who are full of it. You give what you own. They gave shame. He gave faith. How many come to comfort him? Not a crowd, not a bandwagon. Because usually the crowd always comes at the very end. And they were like, we were always with you. But it always starts with one wise person. In the story of Joseph, how many wise men were there? One. It always starts with one. And then one follows another and another and another. In Moses, who was the secret witness? One in the house of the Pharaoh who stood up, the wise person who stood up to the Pharaoh and came and told him, are you going to kill a man who says, I believe it in Allah? So it always starts with one. So when God is manifesting his divine favor, does he showcase a whole crowd? No, it shows one. The Quran tells you very clearly, it's right there in the Quran. Sends one person to comfort the soul, not to stoke the ego. Because one comforts the soul. The crowd stokes the ego. That one was enough because the Prophet upon him, peace and blessings, was sincere and true and humble, seeking to elevate the truth and God, not himself. This moment is also symbolic. Mercy bore fruit, literally and spiritually. Accountability led to transformation. Surrender and faith were role modeled with grace. I'm going to touch on some reflections by Ramadan al-Buti and Shaykh al-Shaʿrawi. These are from my notes. In Fiqh al-Sira, al-Buti analyzes the du'a of Ṭāଈf to extract some legal and moral lessons that we can take. Prophetic strength in vulnerability. Despite being the best of creation, the Prophet upon him, peace and blessings, expressed his weakness. And I'll touch on that more from a psychological perspective, but here I wanted to talk about it slowly from two jurists, for example. So he expressed his weakness and lack of resources to God. Al-Buti teaches that true strength lies in acknowledging one's dependency on God alone. The primacy of divine pleasure, the line, if you are not angry with me, I do not care, becomes a central focus. Again, the aim is God's pleasure. Success is measured by pleasure and closeness to Allah. Patience and perseverance, the dua is a model of sabr, which means patience, and thabat, which means steadfastness, perseverance, in the face of rejection, physical rejection, as well as psychological warfare. Perfect character, even after the abuse and lack of resources, the Prophet upon him, peace and blessings, didn't curse or retaliate. He turned to God and sought the guidance of his persecutors. From Shaykh al-Shaʿrawi, spiritual depth and divine light. His commentary brings out the metaphysical emotional layers of the dua. Absolute, again, reliance, tawakkul. And the Prophet questions, to whom have you entrusted me reflect total surrender, not doubt. Again, people interpret things based on the light that dominates their hearts. So when the Prophet asked that question, it was a question that people interpreted as surrender, trust, total surrender, not a question of doubt. Transformative power of the supplication, the du'a, becomes a spiritual crucible, deepening the Prophet's connection with Allah. It's like an intimate conversation. It's not defiant or opposition. Someone trying to get close to you. Divine light as refuge. So if you look at the entire, again, dua or supplication, I seek refuge in the light of your face. So you have to look at the whole dua. It's a metaphysical invocation seeking protection from the darkness of the worldly and spiritual trials. And I'll touch on that in duha in future presentations. So he's seeking to protect his soul and his heart from the darkness of the world, because again, the world has itself certain darknesses that come. You either let it transform you and you embrace that darkness and you embody it, or you turn to God and you embrace the light from God, divine light, and you push that into the world. So you transform the world instead of the world transforming you. Prayer for all times. Shaʿrawi, this dua is a timeless template for every believer facing hardship, psychological warfare, or despair. So whenever you are facing the darkness of the world, protect your heart, seek refuge in the light, divine light of Allah. Don't let the world change you. Seek light from the divine and change the world. Divine accountability for you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. We always like to say that someone punished, God punished this person, God punished that person. But how many of us will say, maybe God is calling me to account? You know? How many times have you talked to somebody and they're a leader or a scholar and they said, maybe God is calling me to account for what's happening? How many times have you seen somebody display or manifest or embody this dua? Say, maybe God is not pleased with me. Maybe I was conjecturing or I was slandering and God is displeased with me. These are questions we should explore. But the Prophet teaches all of us who aspire to be leaders or aspire to be teachers. This is not just something we're supposed to make a video about, but we are supposed to reflect on and recognize that this is a standard that you must nurture yourself to uphold. For you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. How many can say that they had this conversation with God? And I'm not going to point fingers at anybody. I'm just putting the question for all of us to explore, because we know ourselves and we know if we turn to God genuinely and truthfully and sincerely and have that conversation with God or not. Embedded in this dua is a profound acknowledgement for you, the right to socially reprimand until you are pleased. This reframes the Prophet's suffering not as injustice, but as divine prerogative. It affirms that Allah has the right to correct, call to account, and to discipline. And we have to treat God as Lord of the worlds. It means also our Lord. It means He can call you, me, to account. Again, that's humility, not humiliation. Is a measure of piety and worthiness. I don't agree with the interpretation of humiliation in the translation. I think it's about they're throwing humiliation, and the individuals are throwing the humiliation. He himself wasn't humiliated because he wasn't doing anything wrong, but he opened himself to the possibility, and he opened himself to the possibility before who? Before God, because God is the best of judges. You turn to God and you said, maybe I was wrong. Maybe you are angry at me. You know, He's not gonna trick you and play games. He'll help you discover if there's some things that you need to correct and you need to fix and you need to repair the harm. But we should, again, if you aspire to be a leader, you should be having this conversation. And the more you aspire to be up in your leadership, the more you should be frequent and often in having this conversation with God. The Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, didn't seek vindication from people, but satisfaction from his Lord. Again, the du'a teaches us that his main concern was the pleasure of God. Are you pleased? This is the ultimate surrender, submission, accepting not only divine judgment, but divine reprimand. Because we always like to say, God punished this person, God punished that person, God punished that person. But are we willing to have this conversation and with God and say, maybe this is happening because you're angry with me. You're not pleased with me. There's something that's making you not pleased. And that's the question that I'd like to put on the table. Psychological insight, why accountability deepens mercy. Modern psychology affirms that people trust compassionate leaders when they are also accountable. Like I said, you could use mercy to manipulate people. How to win friends and how to influence people and win friends by Dale Carnegie. You could, I believe it was Ramadan al-Buti who agreed, not that I spoke with him personally, but that he agreed with my understanding in one of his lessons. I also heard him refer to this book in the same way, that this is hypocrisy. You're manipulating people to create, a crowd of followers. So it's not really mercy. Mercy cannot be divorced from accountability. You might compromise a lot of, rules or be compromising just so that you can get a crowd. But you have to demonstrate open to correction, open to being at fault, submit to higher principles than those you want to lead. You can't be leading people and you hold them to higher principles and standards than you. That doesn't make sense. You have to demonstrate sincerity, trustworthiness, and be transformative. The Prophet's, upon him peace and blessings, thought is a case study in this dynamic. His mercy was not performative. It was forged in the fire of divine scrutiny. I mentioned Tony Robinson and his walking on fire. Again, it's performance. It stays a night and it's performance. He went through 10 years of being, going from the top and coming all the way to humble, not humiliation, humility. God put him in a position because God's mercy descends on the position of humility, and he was willing to surrender and receive and accept that position of humility. So he's demonstrating his role modeling for us. And when you are being pushed to that position of humility, that's where the mercy descends. It doesn't descend on those who are like rising in the clouds. Prophet, also upon him peace and blessings, was the most accountable of men and the most merciful. His life teaches us that mercy without accountability is, again, like I mentioned before, it's hypocrisy, it's manipulation, indulgence, and accountability without mercy is tiring. The one that two meet, they produce something, divine. So for you, the right to reprimand until you are pleased. We should have this conversation with God. And again, if you aspire to be a leader, have this conversation often. This is not a statement of despair. It's a declaration of loving surrender to God, a love so deep that it welcomes correction, embraces refinement, and seeks only the pleasure of the one who sees all. Again, just to repeat some of the highlights of the presentation, he was hit from all directions, not to break him, but to bring him face to face with the directions. And in that moment, he chose not validation from the crowd, but again, pleasure from God. Not wrath, but mercy, not pride, but prayer. So the point of this is we learn to lead with the same moral clarity that we learn to lead, to be truthful, to be just, to be merciful, and above all, to be accountable. So I hope this presentation was beneficial. There will be more presentations coming afterwards. But the highlight, given what's happening in Palestine, is to use the right frame when you are looking at the situation. Don't say they are humiliated. Say the ones they're acting in the wrong. They are humiliated. They are humiliating themselves. So they are the target, but the ones who are throwing the shame because you give what you own, they are the ones who are humiliated. They are exposing themselves and manifesting themselves. They are morally bankrupt. They are spiritually poor. So they humiliated themselves because that's what came out of them in that truth versus falsehood. Everyone gives out what's within them. And that's what they brought out. If they undressed the men and made them walk naked, who was humiliated? They are. Not the men who are undressed. You have to look at it with the right lens. But the ones who are undressing the men have humiliated themselves. Do we want to be around someone like that? No. So they humiliated themselves because they showed their character and they showed their morals without coercion. No one forced them to go undress the men. They did it out of willing volition. So they manifested to the whole world their own reality and their own state of being, moral being, spiritual being, mental being. They had nothing to put on the table other than shame, because that's what they had inside of them, shame. The men that were walking, that they undressed, they were coerced into being undressed. They did not do it out of volition. So we shouldn't be looking at them as though they're humiliated. Another way to understand also this prayer, how we look at what's around us. Do we look at it like Addas looked at the Prophet when he saw him alone, being jeered at and thrown at with stones and come with grapes? Because he saw nobility, and that's why he kissed his head. He was impressed by the Prophet and how he responded to such morally bankrupt behavior, you could say. So it's in this clash between the two, falsehood and truth, God elevates the noble people, and the wise can see that. Like Addas, the wise can see, because they're not looking to see if you have a crowd. And if a crowd is running around throwing, stones at you, that doesn't impress them. That makes them feel like these are fools. They're humiliating themselves. And so we have to also wear the right glasses when we are looking at certain situations happening in the world. And we have to discuss them in using those glasses as a way to protect people who are facing under psychological warfare. Addas came with grapes, and he came to meet the Prophet because he recognized noble character. So something to think about when you're talking about people who are facing psychological warfare, how to approach them and how to talk about their situation. I hope this was beneficial, and thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.